Hey, what's up, Spartan Nation, and welcome to another episode of the Spartan Nation podcast. Here with your host Matt Lonsberry and my co-host Aiden Mulcrone. Yeah, we're just gonna jump into some fall camp stuff. We're about, let's see, August 18th, so we are roughly 2 weeks away. Yeah, because it's Friday. 2 weeks away
Yeah.
from Michigan State's season opener against Central Michigan. We're a little over halfway through fall camp. So, going to hit on a couple of topics there, and if we have time, we'll get into a little bit of recruiting stuff too, just because there's been a few things that have popped up this week in for Michigan State's football recruiting. Um, but yeah, thanks as always for joining us. As you can see on the bottom of the screen there, go ahead and follow us on Facebook, follow us on YouTube, and my Twitter feed there. And with that, we'll jump right in, and we're going to start with the quarterback situation at Michigan State. Um, Obviously it's been Noah Kim and Katin Houser since Payton Thorne entered the transfer portal. Mel Tucker did throw Sam Leavitt in there at Big Ten Media Days, but Aiden and you and I both kind of agreed that we see it as Noah and Katin's race here. A couple of weeks ago, we kind of did like a gut meter about where our guts were at as far as this battle, and for me, it was like a couple weeks ago, it was like 55-45, leaning towards Noah Kim, and then we kind of go to Big Ten Media Days. We hear a lot of more about Noah than we do Katin, um, and that kind of pushed it to, for me anyway, to like maybe a 60-40. Maybe even 65-35, leaning towards Noah. I know, Aiden, at one point you said you thought this was Katin Houser's job to lose. Um, but then even as more kind of came out after Big Ten Media Days, even you kind of trended back towards Noah Kim a little bit. But I just want to throw out like what my feelings are now. I've kind of started to shift a little bit back towards a 50-50 split with that gut meter, just because of what we heard coming out of Michigan State's first fall scrimmage, which was last Saturday. They're going to scrimmage again tomorrow. But it does sound like Katin performed really well in that scrimmage, and from different message boards accounts, but like from reputable sources, it does sound like this job is about as close to 50-50 as it gets. That was earlier this week. They're going through practice this week, and we'll see what kind of rumblings come out of the scrimmage tomorrow. But it does sound like this is kind of back to a 50-50 race. So, what's your reaction to that, Aiden? And where's your gut at right now?
Yeah, I mean, I did say I was starting to lean towards Kim kind of within the last week or two or post media days. But I'm kind of with you. I'm back on that 50-50 split. I still believe that Caden Hauser, just because he is a redshirt freshman, kind of they brought him in to be somewhat of the face of the program, whereas
Sure.
he's the first kind of real recruiting class that Mel Tucker had. He's got the pedigree, like coming from a big time high school at St. John Bosco in California, 4-star Elite 11, kind of all the accolades that come with a big time QB. So I do think that it still is his job to lose in a sense, but I would say right now I'm 50-50, but if I had to put like a 51-49 on it, I'd probably say 51% towards Kim still. I still think it's Kim leading the race, but yeah, it's gonna come down to Friday night on September 1st.
Sure.
I truly believe that, and we might not even hear a quarterback announced before that game. So it's just whoever rolls out on the first drive. I'm sure all the MSU fans are really hoping they win the toss or they get the ball to start for that reason.
Right. There's an interesting comment from Keith Allen about Hauser being a little bit bigger a guy, maybe can take some more shots. At Big Ten Media Days, Mel Tucker said that Noah Kim was one of the, I think, 20 fastest guys on the team,
Mhm.
and then your wheels start turning a little bit about potentially doing some dual threat stuff. I know, in 2021, uh, they did some Jay Johnson's offense had some read option type stuff, and Payton would occasionally pull the ball and kind of get outside to pick up yards that way. And so you start thinking about that. But then you hear during fall camp that Katin's got a little pep in his step too, as far as like being able to be mobile, get out of the pocket, create a little bit. So again, not to beat the dead horse, but it does sound like when anything you can do, I can do better type of situation here where both guys are mobile. We've heard a lot about Katin Houser's arm talent. Jay Johnson said it was freakish arm talent when he had media availability a couple weeks ago. At the same time, when I hear both guys talk, and we did get to talk to both guys a couple weeks ago during fall camp, and you can definitely, and this isn't a knock on Katin. It's just like you can kind of tell that it's his first time answering questions from the media, and I just mean like he repeats a lot of things. Some of his phrasing, he says, "I feel like" a lot. Like that's like he starts every question with "I feel like," and then there's his answer. Noah, you can tell he's a little bit more used to the questions. And this has nothing to do particularly, I mean, necessarily to do with like who's going to win the job, but it's funny. It's interesting to see just the difference there as a guy who, has been around for 4 years, who's used to answering questions. And then for Katin, this is his first time doing stuff like that. So again, I don't know how much impact that has on the actual battle, but just an interesting tidbit that I picked up when we spoke to both guys. I guess there's been a lot of discussion about what's best for Michigan State this year, or taking a look at like the long-term best option, I guess, if you're looking at these two guys. Do you think that plays into the decision at any point at this time, Aiden? The coach is looking ahead and saying, maybe player X gives us a better chance in 2024 or beyond, but maybe they're slightly behind player Y right now. Do you think that factors in at all here?
I think it does a little bit, but for what happened last year, the going 5-7, I would say if they made a bowl game last year, if they went 6-6 or won more than 6 games, I would say very much so. But they went 5-7. It was definitely a big letdown just by by the coaches account, by players. They all feel like it was underwhelming, and I know
Sure.
fans, of course, feel like it was very underwhelming. So I think the feeling, everyone in the MSU community, players, coaches, fans, everything, feel that way. So I think for the sake of this year, they really just want to get back on track, and they're going to play the guy they think can win now this season. I think that's going to be the biggest thing. But again, if they made a bowl game last year, if they they didn't win 11 games, but they still won 7, maybe 8. Thorne, with Thorne leaving, whether or not that would have happened is a whole nother story too. But yeah, in the scenario that Thorne does leave, I do think they would probably consider the 2024-2025 more seriously. But I think right now it's just whoever's going to give them the best chance to win this season, because like we've talked about, this schedule is pretty tough by all accounts, non-conference and the conference. So I think for that reason too, that's kind of why Kim would be leading the race, just because of his experience and everything like that. So yeah, I think that goes into account as well, that Kim may have the edge here just because he knows the system, and yeah, that he could give them the best chance to win. And like we've talked about before, the times he has gotten in, he's shown that he can play.
Sure. I'm going to kind of throw a bit of a scenario at you and just kind of get your feedback on it. So let's assume like we are kind of led to believe at this point that the race is too close to call. Let's just say too close to call at this point. And let's say that carries on up into game week against Central Michigan. We've heard Tucker and Jay Johnson both asked about potentially doing what Michigan did last year and starting one guy for the first game and the other guy for the second game against Richmond. I guess what's your opinion on that? And the angle that I want to throw at you is, I've seen some of this on social media and message boards too. And one of the concerns with that is you've got Washington coming in week 3. That's a preseason top 10 team. And the idea of, you've got 2 games against teams that you will be favored against and should beat. And so you can get 2 games worth of reps for your new starter going into Washington, as opposed to splitting it and then making the decision that way. So let's assume that it's a 50-50 split going into the season. You've got to make a decision. Which of those options would you prefer? Like, play both guys or start both guys, I guess, in each game and see what happens, or make a decision, let that guy be the guy for the first 2 weeks and carry 2 games of experience into Washington?
I would prefer carry, 2 games of experience into the Washington game. I think if you give a player, especially quarterback, if you're in a really close competition and you have that, you have that competitive edge and everything, but there's still another guy in contention, you're just going to be looking over your shoulder the whole time and kind of really can't, sit and be comfortable playing just in general. And even at practice, like if you have a bad rep, you're always looking over your shoulder, looking at the coach, looking at him like, oh, are you going to pull me now or something like that? So I think it would be better just to commit to a guy and just ride it out with them, for the first 2 or 3 weeks, especially. And obviously if it starts going downhill fast, then you can be able to make that change. But it's really a confidence thing. I think you saw that with Cade McNamara at Michigan. He was kind of always looking over his shoulder. That, the second he messed up, you saw JJ McCarthy walk into the huddle. So I don't think that's really a healthy way to go about it. And I know that this has been a healthy competition between Hauser and Kim, and you don't really want to split those 2 guys because they are both very much so team players when you listen to them talk and
Sure.
listen to what coaches say about them. And then, the other thing is, we haven't really mentioned it, but it's pretty obvious, is just you're running the risk of, one of these guys going in the transfer portal. And
Sure.
that's kind of why the Michigan quarterback battle, or like starting one guy one game, starting the other game, kind of came about. And I think you just have to accept that and know that you are running the risk of players entering the transfer portal no matter what you do, no matter, we saw it with Payton Thorne. So there's that as well.
Sure. I'm going to throw Keith Allen's question back up here again, or our new question up here. But I'm going to take it in a little bit of a different direction. Comparing the situation in Ann Arbor last year to the one in East Lansing is not exactly apples to apples. For one thing, Cade McNamara had a full year of starting experience under his belt, and JJ was sprinkled in a little bit throughout the year in certain packages and things like that, mostly like a read option type package. And so both of those guys had more field time, or at least like McNamara had more field time than Kim. JJ had more field time than Katin Hauser. So it's a little bit of a different situation. I hope that kind of answers the question a little bit, Keith, as far as like a 2 quarterback rotation. Again, I just think with this way the schedule is lined up, with a top 10 team coming to East Lansing that quickly, I do like the idea of make a decision, get that guy as many reps as you can. Hopefully you're kind of naturally in a position against Central and Richmond to give the second guy some reps in the second half based on what the score is. Certainly, is Richmond still FCS program? I feel like they're still an FCS program.
Yeah, they are.
Okay, so like we know, Mark D'Antonio for many years, that season opener was a bit of a rock fight, it seemed like, for Michigan State, where they didn't blow anybody's doors off, but you kind of just got to the point where you're like, okay, well, they'll be fine. Like that's just kind of what happens with Mark D'Antonio coach teams. But by the time we're 3-4 weeks in the season, Michigan State will be fine. I say that just because last year against Western Michigan, State was in control for the majority or pretty much all of that game, but they never really pulled away to get more reps for like Noah. It didn't really play out that way. So I don't know. I just say that just because they're playing Central this year. I've heard some good things about Central coming out of like Jim McElwain's mouth and about how he's confident in his team. Not saying that they're on upset alert at all. Like that's not where I'm going with this at all. But just like seems like a team that could make some noise in the MAC this year. So, but again, if Michigan State's going to rebound the way that the fan base and the coaches expect them to or would like them to this year, you got to feel pretty good about being able to go into this Central game, get a comfortable lead, and whoever doesn't win the battle, get some reps in the second half. And then Richmond, you certainly should be able to do that. So again, that was kind of a lot thrown out just at once there, but I do like the idea of, as you said, make a decision and get those reps in before a top 10 team comes to East Lansing in week 3. Shift a little bit here. We did learn this week that Auburn coach Hugh Freeze had named Payton Thorne the starter down in Auburn. Just give me your reaction to that, Aiden, and maybe what you think that means for, if anything, for the Michigan State battle. Particularly, it was a surprise when Payton transferred. But then there's a few different scenarios that play out in your mind as far as, well, maybe Noah and Katin really were pushing Payton, and so he got a little uncomfortable and jumped ship. If he's named the starter in SEC school, that would bode well for the competition that's going on in East Lansing. That's just a scenario I'm throwing out there. What's your mindset after hearing that Payton's going to be the starter at Auburn?
Yeah, I mean, thinking a few years back, I remember when Purdue had Danny Etling and Austin Appleby, and both of those quarterbacks transferred to LSU and Florida, and were starting quarterbacks in the SEC right away. So, I mean, I don't think it really affects this quarterback battle that much. I think, obviously it seemed like from reports out of Auburn's fall camp that he was in a bit of a competition and maybe was a little bit behind than people thought, but obviously he just got named the starter. So maybe there was some stuff that wasn't, fully reported, or Hugh Freeze just really has the confidence in him to get the job done. And again, just kind of cleaning house from the previous regime and just moving forward. So, obviously we know what happened with Payton last year with the injuries and everything, and it didn't seem like he was as good with a lot of people were saying it was because of Kenneth Walker wasn't right next to him, which is
Sure.
true.
Yeah.
There's truth to that, but he also wasn't 100%, which also hurt them more, which is the reason they were 5-7, and that's it's not completely his fault because of the injuries. But I mean, what I'm trying to say is it shouldn't affect this quarterback battle, and in terms of the competition of Hauser and Kim pushing Thorne. I mean, you can see Kim and Hauser pushing each other right now, so I don't really think it was it didn't have to really do with competition. I just think that's the way Hauser and Kim are. And I think that is also the way that this coaching staff wants it, because they do preach competition constantly.
Right. I know, like, even going back to spring, out of the spring game, we kind of lined things up, and based on what we saw in that one practice, which was never a good measuring stick, but it was just all we could really go on. And it did seem like at that time Katin was third behind Payton and Noah, who were pretty close at that time. I've heard some stuff, like, again, message boards material, 24/7 sports stuff, but like, again, reputable sources who indicate that even back in spring, Hauser was much closer than what the spring game indicated. Um, so it's interesting to see how this has kind of ebbed and flowed over the last couple of months. And at least in the end, we're going to get an answer here in the next couple of weeks when Michigan State takes the field against Central Michigan, and then we'll just judge it based on what we see from there when the guys get on the field. One of the most important things that Michigan State needs to do for whoever wins the starting quarterback job is being much better at running the football than they were a year ago. And with that, we'll kind of shift topics, because this is one of the things that Mel Tucker talked about in a media availability this week. Was he got a little animated and said, "We got to run the football better," and to kind of set the tone for where he was at, maybe emotionally. So I'm in East Lansing on Monday. We're getting ready for Tucker's press conference, and it's funny. Like you usually get one of two different Mel Tuckers when he has media availability. The first one is pretty laid back, and he'll maybe a couple jokes with the reporters a little bit before things get started. Big smile on the face, and then we just kind of go into it. And then the other Mel Tucker is one who kind of comes in all business, and you can kind of tell that he's not in a gaming mood. So on Monday, it was the latter. He came in, and you kind of could feel it. It was kind of palpable that, okay, he's not in a messing around mood today. And he kind of goes through the press conference and is pretty stoic, but again, all business. And then he's asked the question, what do you want to improve on, or what do you want to see your team improve on most between now and the start of the season? And it kind of lights a fuse, and he starts talking about how we've got to run the football better. And I'm not blaming it on the offensive line this year. I never have blamed it all on the offensive line. And then he kind of not really rips into the tight ends, but he points out that tight ends have to do a better job of setting the edge on outside runs and just picking up their blocks. Running backs have to do a better job of, when there's a hole there, hit the hole, because this is Big Ten football and the hole's not going to be there forever. And so he gets more and more ramped up as this goes on. So couple that with some of the stuff we've seen about Nathan Carter coming out even out of the scrimmage, and some of the hype video stuff that's gone out there. I know it's very little to go on, but Nathan Carter does look like, I'll say it, he looks like he's going to be RB1 this year, just based on some of the stuff that we've seen in those videos, some of the stuff we've heard, the way the guy's built. So I guess where's your going back to the gut meter thing, where's your gut meter at with Michigan State's run game? How much better do you think they will be this year running the football than a year ago?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're definitely going to improve. I'd be shocked if they didn't. But at the same time, kind of how much? And even the year that Kenneth Walker was here, there were a lot of yards after contact that he got. And so it's kind of, what can we see out of Jalen Berger and Nathan Carter in week one, and even guys like Jaren Mangum in week one, because Jalen Berger had a good week one last season against Western. I think he had 2 touchdowns and like 130 yards rushing. So he stepped up week one last season. So can he do that again? Is it Nathan Carter? Who can it be? And then that's going to be kind of a similar situation to what we're seeing with the quarterbacks of, those guys are going to rotate a lot more. They're not going to be like the quarterbacks where it's just pick one guy and stick with it. You can rotate guys in, but who's going to take majority of the snaps? Who's going to get, the most touches? And, what other guy is going to be more of a situational player per se. So it's kind of just seeing that before the Washington game as well. But I do think that offensive line really has improved. I mean, there's, 10 playable linemen now instead of, I would say probably 6 from last season, or
Sure.
6 between like
I think
6 and 8.
I think 6 is probably pretty close to last year.
So I think I believe there's 10 playable guys on that O-line this year. So just for that reason, I would really hope That rushing offense steps up a lot. For the run defense, though, I was a little bit surprised because the run defense, even the last 2 seasons, has really been solid. It hasn't been that much of a worry. Obviously, the lack of depth due to injuries and suspensions last season kind of made it worse. It didn't help,
Sure.
but it was still a decent, rushing defense. So I'm a little surprised by that. But maybe it's just because, the rushing offense, while it does have its problems, maybe the rushing offense is, you know, they're not doing everything right, but they're doing enough right to give that rush defense some problems.
That's fair. That's an interesting way of putting it. Maybe like the strides that they've made in
Mm,
fall camp, and we did hear about Nathan Carter busting a couple big runs at last week's scrimmage, and then even on practice on Monday too. So that could have been some of that. The thing that Mel talked about with the defense was they want to play split safety, and they don't want to have to bring a safety down to help in the run game, and because they want to leave those guys back so they don't get beat over the top and things like that. We know how the pass defense has struggled and the secondary has struggled. One way to alleviate that is being able to have both safeties back, helping those outside corners. And then, but in order to be able to do that, your front seven or front six, if you're in that 4-2-5, they have to do a good job in the run game. So we've talked about the added size at defensive line. When we did our draft last week, Jalen Sammy, Maverick Hansen, Simeon Barrow, Derek Harmon, 4 guys at tackle who we think just will continue to rotate, and that doesn't even take into account Jarrett Jackson, the transfer from Florida State. Dre Butler, we'll see how much he can get in the mix there, the transfer from Liberty. So there is a lot of depth there, keeping guys fresh. A lot of the same stuff on. I don't know if they're quite that deep on the edge, but still pretty close to being that deep on the edge too. So, and then linebacker, they're in a pretty good spot at linebacker as well. So I do expect the run defense to maybe get back to where they were in 2021, when they really made things difficult against the run. With Jacob Slade in the middle, I kind of do expect that. I've got this sinking feeling. Not really sinking feeling. That's not the best term, but I do think Michigan State is going to be more effective on the ground on offense this year. We've talked about the added depth at offensive line. I think the offensive line will take a step forward. I don't know how big of a step forward, but I think it will take a step forward. And I'm telling you, Nathan Carter is just he's starting to pop for me. Just like man, this guy could be pretty good. I'm not saying don't put don't think I'm saying he's going to be Kenneth Walker, because I'm not. Like, that's a very unique situation what we saw to Kenneth Walker in 2021, but I think I expect him to be better than what we saw last year. I'll just say that. And that's not a shot at Jalen Berger either. I think that it took some time for Berger to get some chemistry with the guys. The run game got a little bit better as the season went along, but I guess I expect them to hit the ground running a little bit quicker this year. And then I think that's kind of covers what on there, as far as I do expect the run defense to improve, get back to what it was in 21, and honestly, we need to see Michigan State's run offense be better, because I think it is going to take some time for whoever starts at quarterback. So you got Trey Mosley on the
right,
outside, but
right.
there's not a lot of proven options out there at this point, and so you want to get those guys some reps. But you want to be in a position where you can run the football and help out that new starting quarterback. Yeah, Drew says I'm on the record in Carter's Walker 2.0. Yeah, scrub that from the record, because that's not what I said. Any final thoughts on this topic, Aiden?
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, I just expect this team all around to improve I think the first 2 games, just like you just mentioned, receivers. I think the line applies to this as well. Edge rushers, not really many jobs are kind of set in stone. I would say probably about 4 or 5 guys on both sides, 4 or 5 guys on offense and 4 or 5 guys on defense that I can really pencil in and guarantee that they'll be a starter from week 1 till week 12 or 13. Um, so yeah, it's kind of an open tryout for a lot of these guys, and I think that's how they've been approaching it, and I think that's made just the floor of this team better. I don't know how it's going to help with their ceiling, but the floor of this team is definitely raised because of that.
Cameron wants to know if they do those things better, is the record going to improve? We will get into this a little bit more. I think next week is when we're going to do our season predictions for. We'll start with Michigan State, and we'll kind of do an in-depth look at Michigan State's schedule. We'll go game by game, do win and loss predictions next week for that, and then we're going to do Big Ten predictions, who we think is going to win the East, who we think is going to win the West. And then we'll briefly touch on some of the other conferences around the country too, and maybe do a whole like 4 playoff teams. Like that'll be next week's show, so I'm not going to get into that right now. But Michigan State does have a tough schedule. But if you can do these 2 things effectively, all of a sudden, like you are in a lot more games than when you were in last year, just because you're doing a much better job of controlling the line of scrimmage, and that is really the key to winning and losing football games right there. With that, we're going to move on to one last thing on more run offense, I guess, than anything else. Just want to give a little update on Nick Samak, the starting center. We did get to talk to him this week during media availability, him and Coach Kaplovich. And both of them have said that they expect Samak to be ready by the start of the season. He's dealing with an upper body issue. He kind of indicated his left shoulder when asked, but obviously wasn't asked too many details. But he's working through it. He's working with Novak, Jason Novak, the strength and conditioning coach. He hasn't been a full participant in fall camp. Didn't play in the scrimmage last week, but it does sound like he is on track to getting back on the field and is expected to be ready to go against Central Michigan. And that's a guy who has played a lot of football, and so you kind of expect, even if they do have to sit him out for Central, and that's not the expectation at this point, but you'd expect to be able to get through that and be okay. And obviously, that week 3 against Washington is really what should be circled, but it would be nice to get him back in there, get some reps before that game. But it does sound like Nick Samak's going to be ready to go by the start of the season. All right, going to move on to a new topic here, and I don't think I'm going to spend a ton of time here because we did do this before. But another of Michigan State's marquee games, in my opinion, has been moved exclusively to Peacock, and that's the Michigan State at Iowa game. I can't remember which week it is. I think it's week 5 or 6. And I did this when the news came out that the Washington game was going to be on Peacock exclusively. But again, this is just another situation where one of Michigan State's bigger and a pivotal game, in my opinion, is going to be regulated only to Peacock. And it really gets me irritated that this is kind of the direction that we're starting to go with, games being on streaming services. It makes viewership harder for fans. This one does affect us a little bit more because I wasn't planning on going down to Iowa City to cover this one. I was probably going to cover it from home. So, I'm going to have to find. I'm not subscribed to Peacock right now. I probably will be by the start of the season. But I guess the bigger point I want to make here is we're just brand new into this new Big Ten TV deal. And so far, what Michigan State football has been assigned, if you will, is 2 of their top games on Peacock and one of their home games being moved to Detroit and Ford Field and moved to a Friday. And so it does seem like Michigan State's getting the short end of the stick so far with this Big Ten deal, particularly the agreement with NBC. So I guess what are your thoughts on that, Aiden? This is kind of like, I don't want to say strike 3, but it's like the 3rd time that Michigan State has had to adjust its schedule or has its schedule impacted by the new TV deal. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are talking about conference realignment and kind of just how with all these conferences growing and everything, and how there's going to be, two big conferences at the end of the day, or three big conferences at the end of the day, that, it's going to be a lot like the NFL or like professional sports. And I think, this is another good example of this is kind of turning towards professional sports, because, I mean,
Yeah,
look, take the Lions, for example. The years that the Lions were terrible from, I don't know, all of the 2000s all the way up to, like, even the years they made the playoffs, they didn't have they had the Thursday game for Thanksgiving, but they didn't get on Monday Night Football that often. They were never the Sunday Night Football game, maybe once every, couple years, but they never got those kind of prime time games, or like the 4 o'clock games. That's like the Joe Buck and Troy Aikman calling them or anything. So I think that you're starting to see that more with college football too, and it's become, with the streaming services added, it's becoming a little more obvious, because everyone had Big Ten Network at one point, but now with
sure.
these multiple TV deals, you got CBS, uh, NBC and Fox, they all kind of have their hand in the cookie jar. So they got to divide that up. So when you used to be the, kind of the lower tier game, that week, you'd be on, BTN at
Sure.
noon, but now you're on Peacock, or you're on a streaming service. And I'm sure CBS will eventually start, putting games on Paramount Plus, and
Right.
Fox will. I don't think Fox has a subscription yet that I know of, but I'm sure they'll start doing that eventually too.
Yeah, and so like it's funny because on the surface, I kind of like the Big Ten setup as far as you've got big noon kickoff on Fox. So that's the big, I think, and I think Fox gets their first choice for the game that they want to broadcast, because
Right.
Fox owns Big Ten Network, so they have like the largest chunk of the pie here. And so on paper, this sounds good. You get Fox, the big noon kickoff, CBS, the 3:30 game, and then NBC's the nightcap. And so I like that. The problem is, a lot of, to your point, a lot of these secondary games are getting scooped up by NBC, and they're not broadcasting them during the day or anything like that. They're broadcasting them only on their streaming service, which I don't like. I understand that not everybody gets Big Ten Network, but I do feel like more people get Big Ten Network than are subscribed to Peacock. So I would much prefer this game just be on Big Ten Network. And there was a whole list of games that, and I don't have the tweet in front of me. I'm not gonna dig it up, but there were other games even outside of Michigan State, Iowa, that were also regulated to Peacock, and it was a lot of games that I was like, if I wasn't going to be at the stadium in the press box, and I was just at home watching college football like I did for the majority of my life before I got the job, I would want to watch those games. And
Right.
so that's the issue I have with like the streaming service. Kerry mentions MLB being on Apple TV, which I watch the Tigers. I like the Tigers. I do have a Bally Sports subscription, which that's a whole other topic that I'm not going to get into right now. Not a huge fan of the Bally Sports app. I'll just say that. But I've heard kind of horror stories about the Apple TV Plus, MLB broadcasts, and so yeah, that's I didn't even consider like who are the broadcasters that NBC's hired to do these games on Peacock. I know Premier League is on there, and so there's not like a brand new thing for NBC to have sports on Peacock. But again, not a fan. Would much rather see this game on Big Ten Network, or just more accessible in general. Like that's the bigger point I'm trying to make. Um, Interesting to see maybe how that gets shifted over time. I'm certainly not going to tell fans don't go buy a Peacock subscription, don't watch your team. That's not what I'm saying here at all. But part of me kind of hopes that NBC doesn't get the kind of results that it would like to on these games, and then it shifts its strategy a little bit to maybe make them more accessible. I don't know how realistic that is, but again, not a huge fan here. And hopefully, the thing that really bugs me is, I think Drew asked, how many Michigan games are going to be on Peacock. The season opener for Michigan is going to be on Peacock, but they're playing East Carolina. That makes sense to me. Put that game on Peacock.
Right.
It's East Carolina. Put Michigan UNLV on Peacock. I get that. And shoot, if this news came out and Michigan State Richmond was on Peacock, I wouldn't have a big deal with it. It was okay, fine. It's on a streaming service. If you really want to watch that game, pay your $5 for your monthly subscription and watch that game. The thing that bugs me is it's a top 10 team in Washington coming to East Lansing, and that game's on Peacock. You've got Michigan State going to Iowa, who's also a ranked team. That's expected to be a pivotal game for them, and yeah, that I just don't like that, the fact that game is on Peacock. Jason, yes, Peacock is, I think, only $5.99 a month, so it's not breaking the bank. I get that. It's more, it's not so much the cost, it's the principle. I would like to just be able to turn on the TV and find that game on whatever, either cable network you have or YouTube TV or whatever you use for Hulu Plus or whatever it is for Hulu TV. I would just prefer that to what we to the having another app that you've got to go to on your smart TV. I know the first world problems, but it just bugs me, and the traditionalist in me doesn't like it at all. That's my rant on that. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Aiden, but if not, we can move on to a new topic. But
yeah, I mean, as a streaming service, I've used pretty much every streaming service just
okay,
to watch sports in general, and I've used Peacock for watching Premier League, and I've never had a problem with it in terms of like the user experience. But yeah, it is annoying that it is behind a subscription when, you know, because whenever you think of the fall, whenever you think of, college football, you think of kind of, just sitting at home on the TV all day, and now it's kind of being resorted to streaming services. But yeah, like I know someone was talking about how large MSU's kind of alumni base and just fan base in general is, but you look at Washington has a large fan base as well. Iowa has a huge fan base in the Midwest too. So, at the least put that on, Big Ten Network or something. But yeah,
sure,
you know, that is gonna be, not only a big game for MSU, but a big game for Iowa because, they have some problems that they're trying to sort out as well. And that's another early season conference game that could really turn the corner for them as much as it can turn the corner for MSU.
sure. Brian makes a great point about people in rural areas who don't have great internet connections. They are going to have a hard time, or they're not going to be able to stream games. Like my sister, for instance, my brother-in-law and sister, they're not super sports watch people. Their boys are, my nephews are, but they wouldn't be able to stream this game at their place, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who would have that issue, and it's not right there on again, your cable, DirecTV, Dish, whatever it is, Charter. It's just easier to. And I know Big Ten Network has had some things, especially I think maybe with Dish too. So again, it's not a universal issue for NBC's specifically, but not a fan of it. And I will say, who brought up the point about Drew? Drew brought up the point about maybe Michigan State gets off to a better than expected start, and when they go to Iowa, it's a bigger game. Maybe it does. I do think they did. When Brett McMurphy tweeted about the schedule of games being on Peacock, he did leave the door open for games could get moved around based on results, and so that is something that's notable. So we'll see if that plays into effect. I doubt by Washington that's going to happen because again, Michigan State opens with Central and Richmond, so even if they're 2-0, they're going to have to do more than that to draw more eyeballs after last season's 5-7 year. So yeah, I guess we'll kind of put a bow on that topic. And there was one last thing I wanted to get to tonight. As always, guys, if you have any questions, go ahead and drop those in the comment section, and we'll answer as many of those as we're able to. But While you're kind of thinking about that, we'll go into a new topic here, and I don't know how much I feel like I say this a lot, but not sure how much time we'll spend here, but just a little bit of a recruiting update for Michigan State. Two of their top targets, the running back, 4-star running back Jason Brown from Seattle, Washington. He put Michigan State in his top 3, and Jason Killip, who is a recruiting reporter for Spartan Rivals, or no, not Rivals. It's On3 Sports. He's Spartan Mag. He put in a prediction for Michigan State to land Jason Brown. There's been some rumblings. There's no set date for Jason's commitment, but it does sound like, within the next couple of weeks is a possible timeline for him. Sounds like Michigan State's in a really good spot there. The other guy who put Michigan State in the top 3 was DeAndre Carter, who is a 4-star interior offensive lineman. But it does seem like Auburn is in the pole position for DeAndre Carter. So I guess we'll start with those two guys. Aiden, where are you at with these recruiting battles, and what do you kind of expect to see maybe over these next couple of weeks?
Yeah, I mean, obviously MSU already has a running back commit for the 24 class with Anthony Carey. Sorry, it's just blanked out for a sec. But yeah, Anthony Carey's already there. But adding another running back would be big. I think, it's needed as well. I think there's a lot of value by adding that depth because, Jaron Mangum and Nathan Carter are likely leaving after this year. And then you have, I don't know where Berger's at. I think he's a junior or senior too. So, you're kind of rolling in some new guys. You didn't get Kedrick Riscano from last cycle. They added Jalen Barber in late, but still he's nowhere near ranked. He could,
Sure.
He does have the potential. There's obviously some tools that he has that not a lot of people do, but at the same time, they're looking for those blue chip type guys. So adding 2 running backs in this class would, be a good thing. And then as for DeAndre Carter, obviously, yeah, I never thought MSU was really leading for him, but they've been in the hunt kind of the whole time. He took an official visit here. And yeah, if Auburn's obviously in the lead, we'll see what it comes down to. I don't know his timeline. I do think he does have a commitment date set. If I
September 3rd. Yep.
Yeah, so he does have a commitment date set. So we'll see.
Yeah, I do think as far as Carter, I think he's a bit of a cherry on top type of target. And I say that because, Michigan State already has several offensive linemen already committed to the 2024 class. Kaplovich has done a good job of identifying 3-star guys who maybe are underrated as prospects, and then they come, a couple of years in the system. And again, we haven't really seen those guys yet. We're starting to with Gino Vandemark. Got his feet wet last year. He's expected to start this year. We've heard some things about Kevin Wigginton, who's a younger guy who is probably going to be in a backup role at one of the guard spots, but that's one of those 3-star guys who are coming up through the system. So I think that's coming. I think we haven't seen it yet. And then you land a guy like Cole Dellinger from, was it Clarkston, Michigan, that he came from, and then Stanton Ramil from Alabaster, Alabama, Thompson High School, 4-star kid. We've heard rave reviews in spring. They were early enrollees. We heard rave reviews about those guys when they first got here. So I think that's coming. I think there's reason to have faith in Kaplovich, his ability to identify 3-star guys who are underrated and then develop them up. So I guess I say that to say it's not the end of the world if Carter does end up at Auburn, where he's kind of projected to go at this point. But if you pair Jason Brown with Anthony Carey, all of a sudden we start to see a shift here as far as, Michigan State's been very I don't want to say over reliant, but been very reliant on transfer running backs during Mel Tucker's tenure. Kenneth Walker, Jarek Broussard, and Jalen Berger last year. Then they bring in Jaron Mangum and Nathan Carter this year. We saw the high end of that 2 years ago with Kenneth Walker, and then not to pin it all on the running backs, but last year did not go nearly as well with Berger and Broussard. So you would like to see Michigan State land some high school guys and be able to develop them and bring them up from true freshmen all the way through it. And Ephraim Reed talked about that when we talked to him a couple weeks ago during availability too, like wanting to make that shift between relying on the transfer portal and being able to develop guys. If you land 2 4-star guys, all of a sudden you've got a potential dynamic duo who I'm not going to say they could rival like a Blake Corum or a JJ or a Donovan Edwards, but like we've seen how Michigan has won the conference the last 2 years, offensive line, pounding running game. Michigan State can emulate that a little bit, maybe be a little bit more balanced, which I think everybody would like to see. But like all of a sudden, you bring in a couple of high-profile running backs, you keep improving with the offensive line, and you've got that run production back, and that's something that again Mel Tucker talked about this year. So definitely something to keep an eye on in the next couple of weeks is that Jason Brown recruitment, which would just be a real big. Number one, just landing another 4-star running back, but then pulling a guy from the West Coast and bringing him across country would just be a huge win for Ephraim Reed. With that, let's shift a little bit to just give a kind of a minor update on David Stone. I don't know if he has a commitment date set at this time. It seems like he might have set a date. But this is a recruitment that we've watched for several months now, and maybe even a year now, going back to when, Brandon Jordan and Marco Coleman were here recruiting. But it does sound like Michigan State is, I don't want to say fading in this recruitment, but it kind of sounds like they're on the back burner here. I don't know. Oh, there we go. Greg Karn.
Yeah, it's next week.
next week. Yeah. August 26th is when he's making his decision. Thank you, Greg. And it does sound like Michigan State made a valiant effort here. It by all accounts, unless David Stone is really good at just hyping up different schools, I don't think that's not the vibe I get from the kid. Not that I've talked to him personally, just what I've seen. It does seem like he really liked Michigan State, but the pull of Oklahoma, and I know there's a few other schools in his recruitment as well, but it does seem like maybe that pull to stick with the hometown team is pretty strong. So again, just want to give a little bit of an update there. Doesn't sound like Michigan State's going to be able to pull off, hit a grand slam here with David Stone, but just your reaction, I guess, to that, Aiden, and your thoughts on this recruitment as a whole. Let me phrase it to you this way. We've seen a couple cycles now where Mel Tucker and the staff have taken some big swings, more so last year than this year, but they've taken some big swings and came up short. Do you think a shift in approach needs to happen, or is that just one of the byproducts of recruiting? You take big swings at big guys, and if it doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think they have, I think that is part of recruiting now is you got to take big swings, like now more than ever, just because, schools' reaches are larger now more than ever, just with everything, with social media, with branding, just in general. I think for MSU specifically, they recruited a lot of these guys pretty hard, and I think they were a little too. I'll say this, and I'll explain it, but they were a little too early on some of these players because, they're recruiting these guys and they don't have up-to-date facilities. They don't have some of the state-of-the-art things that a lot of other programs do, and now they're starting to get these things. So sure. Now with this new locker room, with new jerseys, that's a huge thing. I think you talked about how Brandon Jordan moved on. Saeed Khalif, who was the kind of the general manager of MSU's recruiting, and the program in general. He moved on as well. They brought in Mark DeThorne, I think that's his name, from Pitt
Yep.
this offseason. So to be the director of recruiting. So I think just there is a large transition period, and I've talked about this a lot of just they're still in a transition period. But I think once they get to the end of this, and I think we're almost there, that once it is completely Tucker's regime and all the players are his and everything else, I think then that's when you start to land some of these guys. But I mean, props to them for trying. Obviously, they got to the finish line with a lot of these dudes, but
Yeah.
eventually it's like, okay, you really just need to land one at this point. And once you get one of them, then kind of you'll start to see some of the dominoes fall, and then you can really build from there. But I say that, but at the same time, the recruiting classes have still been, pretty good. Obviously, they've,
Oh
had
yeah.
2 top 25 classes in a row. They're shooting for a third. Obviously, if they add Jason Brown, that really puts you in a good spot. Even if you don't land Carter or Stone, and they just, really, if they land Brown, all they need to do is just fill the rest of this class out with, you know, it doesn't matter if they're 3 stars or not. You should be able to fill this class out to 20 to 25 guys, and then you're probably in the top 25 again.
Yeah, I think it just kind of goes back to just how crucial of a year this is for Mel Tucker and the program, because to your point, you've got the Tom Izzo football building coming. Uh, like that's going to be completed sometime, I think, within the next calendar year at the latest. So like that's in time for the next recruiting class. You mentioned like the New Jerseys and things like that. Those are going to be featured for the first time this year. Those are great. You got to couple it with wins on the field, because shiny objects like facilities and jerseys, if you're not winning games, that's all they are, is shiny objects. You start showing progress on the field, and you add the facilities and the uniforms and things like that, then you got some potential momentum. So that's what makes this year so critical for the program. And again, against the schedule, I know we've beat this horse to death, but against the schedule, 7-5, I think, gets that job done as far as showing progress. It gets you back to a bowl game. It means you beat somebody of significance, either one of those games against top 10 teams, or a road game at Iowa, a road game at Minnesota. One of those, you're winning a majority of those, what people would call 50-50 games. And that shows that progress. I mean, 7 losses last year, 6 of them by double digits. That can't happen again.
Mhm.
So that's it's you want to see results in the record, in the wins and loss columns, but you want to see results in how games look too. Point margin, how competitive you are. That's the areas that we need to see some steps taken in 2023.
Mhm.
I think with that we'll call it a night. Again, next week we're gonna do our season preview for Michigan State. We're gonna go game by game. We're gonna give you wins and losses, our official predictions. We'll give you predictions on the Big Ten as a whole. We'll touch on some other conferences around the country, and I think we'll do our 4 playoff teams too. It'll be like a college football preview show right before week 0 games. So looking forward to that. I think that's gonna be a lot of fun. Hope you guys join us. Thank you all for the viewership. Any final thoughts, Aiden?
There's one question from Carrie
Oh,
Ellis that I was looking at
sure.
in the comments of the how much of a factor is performance and lifestyle expectation from the coaches going to pull drive recruits? I would say the biggest factor right now for MSU, I mean, I think the coaching staff, they're not still in contention with David Stone if it's not for the coaching staff. So
Sure.
I think even with Brandon Jordan leaving, that coaching staff can still recruit really well. Even with Marco Coleman gone, Deron Reynolds comes in, who is a very polished coach, coached at Stanford for a while, amongst other places. Jim Salgado is a guy who coached in the NFL and all over college for years. So I really don't think that that's an issue for MSU. If anything, that's probably their greatest asset. I think a lot of it comes down to, and this is really kind of the sad part, but it does come down to NIL. And I think MSU has done a good job with NIL. And I think the biggest thing with MSU is that they're honest about NIL. And
Sure.
I think there's a lot of schools, and I'm not going to, okay, I'll throw one
Just go
school
for it.
under the bus. I'll throw
Yeah.
Miami under the bus. Obviously, there's a lot going on with Miami right now about some of their big donors lying about how much money these kids are getting. So I'm not saying Oklahoma is doing that to David Stone, because I don't think they are. I think, David Stone is, that feels like home to him. So if that,
Sure.
if that's how he feels. But I do think a lot of schools, and, I know Hugh Freeze has been known for lying about giving players money for a while
Before
now.
it was legal.
Before it was legal, but at the same, yeah. So we'll see how much Auburn kind of gains or loses from NIL. But yeah, there's a lot of numbers being thrown out there that really aren't accurate. So I think that's the biggest thing. But I do think MSU is really honest with NIL, and I do think that their coaches are good recruiters, and that's the reason why they're in contention. And I also think the players are big advocates and great recruiters as well, because that's what you want out of a big time program.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this just because you brought up Hugh Freeze, and we know about his past at Ole Miss, and we know that NIL is part of recruiting, and it's a legal part of recruiting. Well, actually, it's not supposed to be for pay for play, but we all know that's what it is. That's what it's become. But the interesting thing is, it's been, I think it was last week. It's Friday, so like almost 2 weeks ago now, but Auburn flipped a 5-star kid from Georgia and flipped a 5-star kid from Alabama
Right.
2 weeks ago. So somebody's well funded down there in Auburn. I'll say that. And again, if the collectives and things like that, that's kind of how the operation goes nowadays. But it made me think of that when you brought up Hugh Freeze and the Ole Miss thing. That's like, well, they're passing around something down there, because if you get a 5-star to flip from Georgia, who just won 2 national championships, and Alabama, who's won 6 in the last 14 years or whatever it's been. So
Right.
yeah, they're doing something right down there. We'll see if that can be maintained after we see what Auburn looks like on the field. And obviously, I'll be at least keeping a partial eye on Auburn now that Payton Thorne is down there. Just curious to see how he does down there. So with that, I think we'll wrap it up here. Thank you guys again for tuning in. Appreciate it. We'll see you next week, and looking forward to doing our kind of full Michigan State breakdown for the 2023 season, and as well as college football as a whole. So we'll see you guys next week.